Well, hello everyone, and thank you for attending today. Welcome to the Surfer webinar on exporting KML and KMZ files for use in Google Earth. My name is Carrie Dickinson. I'm the Surfer Product Manager, and I've been with Golden Software here for over 15 years. And I'm going to go over the export options when creating KML and KMZ files, so you can be sure to get the file that you need to display the map correctly in Google Earth. So go ahead and ask questions during the webinar. You can send your questions to the webinar host via the questions box on the webinar control panel. Just type in your question and it will be sent to the webinar host, who will either answer it or forward it to me. So please send in your questions, but if I don't get to it, I'll follow up with an email after the webinar is completed. The webinar will also be recorded, so after the webinar is finished, if you missed anything or you want to rewatch something, the video will be available to view on our website at www.goldensoftware.com. So let's begin. Okay, so let's say I created this map of emissions in southern Nevada. This map has a contours layer, a base layer, and a post layer. The post layer has the data point locations, which I can see all of these layers in the Object Manager. There's the base layer of the city boundaries and the contours. So I also created a color scale bar with some rotated text labels. And note that for the contour layer, if I select the contours layer and click on the Layer tab, I set an opacity for 35%. Since my goal is to export this map into Google Earth, I want to be sure that I can see through the contours to the Google Earth image under it. The polygons in the base layer, they don't have any fill patterns. They're hollow. So first, let's talk about coordinates. KML and KMZ files both require that the units in their files are in latitude and longitude. This is a requirement for the file format. So the first thing you need to do is to take a quick glance at the X and Y values for your map. If your map is already in latitude and longitude units, then no problem. You can go straight to clicking File Export to export the KML KMZ file. However, if your units are not in lat long, like in this case, then you must have a coordinate system specified for the map. So I'll go ahead and double check this, which I can do by clicking Map in the Object Manager, and in the Property Manager, click the Coordinate System tab. Now, if the map had a coordinate system defined here, then again, no problem, and you would go straight to File Export, and Surfer will automatically convert the coordinates from this existing system to latitude and longitude during export. However, in this case, it shows unreferenced local system. This tells me that there's no coordinate system specified for the map. If I try to export it right now to a KML or KMZ file, I'd get an error that the coordinates exceed the allowable range for latitude and longitude coordinates, which is true, as these X and Y values just simply can't be latitude and longitude. So in this case, I need to specify the coordinate system for the map. To do this, all I have to do is click the Change button, select the coordinate system for the map, which I know in this case it's going to be UTM, North America, Zone 11 North, and just click OK. You may get a warning that some of the layers are unreferenced. That's totally fine, just click OK. If you want to reference those other layers, such as these two layers, you can click the Assign Now button here, and that will automatically assign the same coordinate system to all of the map layers. But it's really not necessary for simply exporting the map to KML KMZ files. So now that Surfer knows the coordinate system for the map, it can automatically convert the data to latitude and longitude upon export to the KML file. So what I'll do now is I'll turn off the axes, because I really don't need the axes in Google Earth. And then I'll click File, Export. Now I'll give this file a name. And I'll choose to save it as a KML file. Now, KMZ files are just a compressed version of KML files. So they're very similar and the export options are going to be the same. So I'll just select to export as a KML file and click Save. Now that part is easy. So now we'll get into the export options dialog. Now this is where we tell Server how to export those labels, lines, and the points that we have. So on the scaling page here, the most important thing here is to verify that you're exporting in map units and not page units. Now you can tell this by looking at the file rectangle coordinates, which are the coordinates that will be exported to the file. If you just had a single map you are exporting, the scaling source up here would be set to map, and the file rectangle will be in map units. However, in this case, I'm exporting a color scale bar. So that'll automatically set the scaling source to be in paper space, page units, and my file rectangle units will be in inches. I really don't want my map to be exported in page units. Google Earth would think these coordinates were latitude and longitude coordinates and put my map off the coast of Nigeria. So make sure that the scaling source is set to map, and the file rectangle coordinates are map units, in this case the UTM coordinates. For the spatial references page, if your map does not have a spatial system, coordinate system defined for it, you're not going to have this spatial references page. So if you don't see it, that's fine, don't worry about it. If you do see it, you really don't need to select anything since the map is exported in latitude and longitude coordinates, and Google Earth assumes that all files are in latitude, longitude anyway, so it doesn't even use this information. So I would just uncheck these checkboxes if any of them were checked, so that no other files are created to clutter up your folder. So the bulk of the information is going to be on this page, the KML KMZ options. This is where you define how Surfer exports text, symbols, polylines, and polygons. Now each of the selections for these options is good in its own way. It just depends on what are you exporting and how you want it to look. So I'm going to walk through some of these options to give you an idea of what they do. So if a user is going to change the export options, it's usually one of these first two options for text objects and marker objects. The rest of the options aren't used very often. So the first option is for text objects. This is how Surfer will export the text to a KML or a KMZ file, such as contour line labels, axis labels, text blocks, post map labels, any sort of text on the map. And there are 4 options to choose from. The first one is to export text as placemark pins with text descriptions. So, in this case, each text item is exported as a placemark with a text label. When you open it in Google Earth, each text location has a little icon at that location, which is usually a yellow push pin by default, and the pin itself is labeled with a text. If you have just a few text locations marked on the map, this could be useful. But if you have axis labels, contour labels, or post map labels, you'll get a lot of pins all over the map, which you may not want. The next option is export as rendered curves and areas. This option converts the text objects to polylines and polygons. The text looks just like it does in Surfer. For example, if you have rotated labels, like the color scale bar here, the text will appear rotated in Google Earth too. Google Earth does not support text rotation, so this is the only way to export rotated text from Surfer and have it show as rotated in Google Earth. Also, when you zoom in and out of Google Earth, the size of the text does not change. So if you want to keep the size of the text the same relative to the ground, this would be a good option. However, if you have a lot of text labels, then each character will be its own polyline and polygon, and you could potentially have thousands of polylines and polygons in your file, which could increase the file size significantly. Having large files would make sharing it or even loading it into Google Earth more difficult. The third option is to export as labels. Now these are actually placemarks pins with text descriptors also, only there is no icon, so you just see the text labels. And this is really pretty nice, especially when there's a lot of text. The text size does get bigger or smaller as you zoom in and out of Google Earth. So this option and rendered curves and areas, these two are probably the most popular options for exporting text objects. The last option is to don't export text objects. It's pretty self-explanatory. No text items are exported to the file. For now, I'll choose to export the text labels as labels. The second object is for marker objects. And again, there are 4 options. And the marker objects are going to be symbols. So these will be postmap symbols, symbols on a viewshed layer, any drawn symbol. The first option would be to export as placemark pins. So similar to the text, with this option, all symbols are exported as a placemark pin. So when you open it in Google Earth, each symbol location has a little icon at the location, which is usually a yellow push pin. You can change the icon in Google Earth to another icon for each individual object. But if you have hundreds or thousands of points, you may not want to choose this option, as you'll have hundreds or thousands of little push pins all over your map. The second option is to export as rendered curves and areas. This option converts the symbols to polylines and polygons. The marker symbols in Google Earth look just like they do in Surfer. For example, if you have a star shaped in Surfer, then it's going to look like a star shape in Google Earth too. In addition, the symbols will retain their relative size. So if you scaled the symbols in Surfer to be a particular size relative to the ground, then the scale is retained. However, each symbol, just like for the text, each symbol in the map is going to be its own polyline and polygon. So if you have a lot of symbols in your map, this could greatly increase the size of your map, of your KML or KMZ file. The third option is to export as icon pictographs in GIF format. So this is a great option to preserve the look of these symbols while keeping the file size small. It exports each unique symbol as a small GIF file, and then that image is used as the icon when the file is opened in Google Earth. So this is a great option when exporting classed postmaps, or if you have multiple symbol types displayed on the map. For example, if you have 50 points and all use the same symbol, then only one GIF file is created for that one symbol. If you have a classed postmap with 10 star symbols, some circle symbols, and some square symbols on the map, then you'll have 3 GIF files, one for a star, one for a circle, and one for a square. So note that if you share the KML or KMZ file with a colleague, you need to be sure to send the GIF files also. Otherwise, Google Earth will use the default icon. In addition, the icons are scaled to the screen size, not to the ground, so they do increase or decrease in size as you zoom in and out of the map in Google Earth. And then the last option is to don't export the marker symbols. Obviously, this would just be, all the symbols are not being exported to the KML file. So for now, I'm going to choose to export the marker symbols as icon pictographs, because you can see I do have some stars here. Now, the third option is for polygon objects, such as polygons drawn on the map or included in base layers, or the areas of fill between the contours. Again, there are 4 options to choose from. The first 3 only affect the transparency of the polygons. So export using application transparency. This uses the opacity actually specified in the Surfer file. So if your polygon fill has an opacity set to 30%, or 35% like our contours do, then the area fill in Google Earth also has the same opacity set to 35%. Export all areas as opaque. This setting sets all areas to be completely opaque, not transparent at all, regardless of the opacity settings specified in Surfer. Export all areas with 50% transparency. This setting sets all polygons in the KML or KMZ file to have an opacity setting of 50%, regardless of the opacity settings in Surfer. And don't export areas. This option tells Surfer not to export any polygons to the KML or KMZ file. For now, I'll choose to export the polygons using the application transparency. This is the most common setting, and it's the default, just because most users want their file in Google Earth to look just like it does in Surfer. For polyline objects, you get 3 settings. These will be polylines such as polylines in base layers, contour lines, watershed or viewshed boundaries, etc. The 3 options are, again, to export using the application transparency, which exports the polylines using the opacity settings specified in the Surfer file. Export all curves as opaque, so this sets all polylines to be completely opaque, which is not transparent, regardless of the opacity settings in Surfer. And the last option is don't export the curves. So in this case, no polylines will be exported. Again, I'll choose to export the the polylines using the application transparency. Just like for polygons, this is the most common settings, as most users want their file to look like in Google Earth, just like it does in Surfer. So under line width, now we have two other options. When line width is set to fixed for all lines in KML pixels, the line width for all lines in the file are going to be the same. The default value is 2, which makes the lines 2 pixels wide in the KML KMZ file. The default option, though, is scaled width in inches per KML pixel, where the line width for each line is individually determined. So if they're thicker lines in Surfer, they're going to be thicker in the KML file. So you'll have thicker lines graded to thinner lines. And then you could enter a value here. Now this number is the number of inches per pixel. So the line width specified in Surfer in inches is divided by the number you enter in here, inches per pixel, to determine how many pixels that line will be in the KML KMZ file. So you really don't have to do the math so much. You can just leave the default value for now. Because I have different line widths in this map, you can see the thicker lines here going to thinner lines down here. I'll leave it set to scaled width in inches per KML pixel, but I'm going to change the value from 0.05 to 0.01. So that a line width of 0.01 in Surfer is going to be 1 pixel in the KML file. Now the last two options, the first one is split compound polygons into pieces. Now this option should only be checked if you're experiencing problems where some of the polygons aren't filled in Google Earth the way that they should be. It may look like there are gaps in the fill between contours. In general, this should remain unchecked. But if you do have issues with color fill, then you can try checking it, and hopefully that will resolve the issues. What it does is it splits any compound polygons, that is a polygon that intersects itself, into multiple smaller polygons, instead of exporting it just together as a single large polygon. And it will make the KML or KMZ file larger if you check it because of all the smaller polygons. So for now, I will leave it unchecked. And then the last option is to use the Z-level elevation contour value as the object ID if available. Now this option uses the Z-level of the contour lines as a line object ID in the KML KMZ file. This is actually useful if you're exporting a contour layer, so you can identify the individual contour lines in Google Earth and view the Z values for those lines. I would always leave this checked. I don't really know of any use case where you would actually want to uncheck it and have a generic ID for the contour lines in the KML file. If you aren't exporting contour lines, then this option isn't going to be doing anything, so leaving it checked isn't going to hurt anything. So I'll leave that checked also. So before we go on, are there any questions about these export options? So someone asks, if you export the marker objects as GIFs, can you later ask Google Earth to not scale them with the screen? I don't think so, because what they are is the GIFs will be imported as the icons for the pins, for the place marks, and I think Google Earth will always scale the icons as you zoom in and out. Unless you know of an option in Google Earth to not scale the place mark icons, but I don't know that option in Google Earth. As far as I know, Google Earth always increases and decreases the scale as you zoom in and out of the place mark icons. Any other questions? Okay, so now that I've selected all my options, I'll go ahead and click OK, and my KML file is exported. So I'm going to export the file a couple more times using the different options, and we can compare the results in Google Earth. So I'm just going to click Export again, export as another KML file, and make sure the scaling source is set to map. Ignore that, And in this case, all I'm going to do is I'm going to change the text objects to rendered curves and areas, and the marker objects also to rendered curves and areas. And I'll choose the line width to all be the same at 2 pixels. And click OK. Now I'm going to export it one more time. In this case, I'll choose to, oh, actually, I wanted to do one more thing before that. I'm going to not export the marker symbols, but I do want to export the labels here as placemark pins. But because I want the labels to be in the exact position of the symbol, I'm going to move my postmap labels to the center of the symbol and then export. So I'll click on my postmap layer here and click on the symbol tab. Click on the labels tab in the property manager and change the position relative to symbol to center. That moves all the labels to the center of the symbol so that when they are exported as a placemark pin, the pin will be right at the location of the actual symbol. So now I'll click the export icon, choose to export as the third KML, oops, and click Save. Make sure my scaling source is set to map. I have map units here. And then on this one, for the text objects, I'm going to choose Export as Placemark Pins with, excuse me, with text descriptions. And I'll change marker objects to not export marker objects. And I'll go back to a scaled width for my lines. And click OK. All right, so now let's open Google Earth and see how those 3 options look. All right, so now you guys can see my Google Earth window here. So I'll go to File, Open. Select the first KML file I created and click Open. I'll move it so we can see it a little bit better, rotate it out, and zoom out. All right, so here you can see that the text looks really good. And it gets larger and smaller as I zoom in and out of the map. Now I exported these as labels, if you remember. And you can see that as I zoom in and out, some of the labels disappear or reappear or even change positions, like on the side of these of the color scale here. This is under the control of Google Earth, so Surfer can't do anything about that. Note, though, that the rotated color scale labels are no longer rotated. Now the symbols look just like they do in Surfer. They also get larger and smaller as I zoom in and out. If you remember, I exported these as icon pictographs, so these are going to be the GIF files. And the polylines and polygons have the transparency applied to them. I can see the Google Earth image right on the other side of the Surfer image. And the line width increases just like it did in the Surfer file. I can see thicker lines up here and thinner lines down there. Now you can expand the layer in the navigation in the places here. And you can see there's 3 layers under it: the contours, base, and post layers, just like they were in Surfer. Now if I expand the contours layer, you'll see all the polygons for the contour fill. And if I scroll down, you'll see all the polylines for the contour lines. And they have the Z value as the object ID. I'll collapse that, and if I expand the base layer, you can see the 2 polygon objects right there that I have in the base layer. And in the post map, you'll see the place mark for each of the actual symbols, and then you'll see the labels. So if I right-clicked over the place mark for the symbols, the marker objects, and go to Properties, you can see that GIF file is imported as the icon right here. And for the labels, if I right-clicked and clicked Properties, there's no icon selected for the label. It's just the label. And then these objects down here, these are going to be the objects for the color scale. The text objects, and then the rectangles to create the color scale bar. So for now, I'm going to turn this layer off, and then I'll I'll open the second KML file. So in this case, the text and symbols were exported as rendered polylines and polygons, and I used a fixed line width. So you can see that the text also looks good. You can see that it's rotated here for the color scale. But if I zoom in and out, the text does not change size. It stays the same relative size. And same with the symbols. The symbols also look good, just like they do in Surfer, but they don't change size as I zoom in and out. It's a relative size. And I also exported it with a fixed line width of 2, and you can see that the line width is the same throughout. Now if I expand the layers in the KML file, again, I can see my map layers. Only now for the post layer, instead of seeing icons and labels, I only just see a bunch of polygons. And these are going to be all the symbols here, all the polylines and polygons for the stars. So now let me open the last example I created. And this one is going to be exported. Let's see, file open. And this exported the text as placemark pins with a text descriptor and no marker symbols at all. So in this case, you see the default pin icon next to each of the text descriptors. The pin is at the same location as the original posted point, which is why I had to move the label to the center of the symbol in Surfer before exporting. You can also see there is a pin next to each of the labels on the color scale though. So this might be best if you didn't have a lot of other text in the file. So you can see that they all work and they all look good, but the export options you choose really depends on how you want it to look in Google Earth. If you had your own GIF file, your own icon, you might want this, and you could, for example, change the icon for all these labels from a push pin to whatever file you have, what other icon you choose. So are there any questions about getting the file into Google Earth? So someone asks, how can you export a post map with proportional symbols and keep the symbols the different sizes? Exporting to GIF, I get the same size symbols. So if you had the different symbol sizes, I would choose to export as rendered curves and areas. The polylines and polygons in the KML file will be the same size as they are in the Surfer file. The GIF, I don't think you can set the size of icons in Google Earth. So the icon, any of the options that use an icon, it's all going to be the same size. So rendered curves and areas would be the best bet in that case. Are there any questions other than about getting the files into Google Earth? All right, let me go back to Surfer. It'll just pop up in a second. There we go. So are there any other questions about any part of this webinar that wasn't already answered? Nope. So someone asks, I assume it's better to export as a KMZ when using a GIF. Actually, it doesn't matter because the GIF is going to be a separate file. So if you have 10 different GIFs, it's not going to make the KML or KMZ file any larger. the KML KMZ file will be compressed for a KMZ, so it's going to be a little smaller, but using a GIF won't make a difference in that case, unless you're relative to using rendered curves and areas. But again, that's not going to be only for KMZ files. If you have one file with a GIF and one file with rendered curves and areas, the KML or KMZ file with the GIF is always going to be much smaller because it's not rendering all those extra polylines and polygons. But you'll have a KML or KMZ with a GIF versus one file. Someone asked, are labels exported as lat-long units? Everything in the KML or KMZ file is going to be exported in lat-long units. Google Earth doesn't read any other units other than lat-long, so everything in the KML or KMZ file has to be in lat-long units. Someone asks, does the import work with the basic version of Google Earth? Yes, it does. Before I got Google Earth Pro, I just had the basic free version, and you can just click File Open, and that works just fine. And you also ask, any special reason to get the upgraded version of Google Earth? It really depends on what you use it for. You might want to Google the differences between Google Earth and Google Earth Pro. I only have Google Earth Pro because there was a promotion last year, I think, that gave it away for free. I don't know if it's still free or if you have to pay for it now. But I was using Google Earth Basic, and for what I was using it for, it was perfectly fine. So it's really going to be up to you if you want Google Earth or Google Earth Pro. So that's going to conclude my presentation on exporting KML and KMZ files from Surfer for use in Google Earth. If you have any additional questions once the webinar is concluded, you can call our technical support phone line at 303-279-1021 or email questions to either surfersupport@goldensoftware.com or directly to me at Kari, that's K-A-R-I, at goldensoftware.com. Again, a recording of this webinar will be posted shortly on our website at www.goldensoftware.com. And if there's any other questions that we haven't addressed yet, I'll go ahead and I'll address those in email right after we finish here. So thank you again for your time.